Olá, bem-vindos a mais uma das nossas Conversas Vadias. Hoje temos connosco Badiucau, um artista e um ativista, um chinês, um cidadão chinês que está neste momento a viver na Austrália e que tem sido um ativista na defesa das liberdades e dos direitos humanos na China. Por isso, tem sofrido fortes pressões do governo chinês. Eu sigo há bastante tempo o seu trabalho como artista e como ativista contra a repressão levada a cabo pelo Partido Comunista Chinês. E hoje tenho o prazer, e é mesmo, devo dizer-vos, um prazer, ter Badiucau connosco. É um prazer pelo seu poder criativo e é um prazer pela forma como tem agarrado as causas da liberdade e dos direitos humanos e as tem defendido a todo custo, em todos os momentos. So, Badiucau, nice to see you today and nice to have you with us. I'm very pleased for having you. It is an honor for me having you today to have this talk when we are a few days to have the Olympic Games, but I will not start by the Olympic Games in China. I will start talking with you about your work. That is something that captivated me in a certain time. Could you please tell us more about how did you start as an artist, also as a dissident, because you were a student of law, and in a certain point something occurred and you became a dissident. Can you talk with us about? Can you tell us about your story? That is a very, very interesting story.
Firstly, I want to say thanks so much for inviting me to have this opportunity to talking to many important people in Europe. Well, I'm an artist and I'm actually born in an artist family. My great parents, they were like filmmakers, pioneer filmmakers in the very early time in China. However, my family history proves that being an artist is always a very dangerous thing in China because my great parents persecuted by the CCP, China's Communist Party, in the 1957 during the intellectual movement. And actually, my grandpa died, and it really broke my family. So when I grew up in China, my family never really wanted me to be an artist because they think it's a dangerous job. They would rather me to actually be a doctor, be a lawyer instead of making art. So that's how I ended up in a law school in Shanghai. But, I always feel this urge to create things, to making art, just like what my great parents would do. However, I'm not really supported by my family. But there is this very critical incident happening in my university time that kind of making me see China not just from the narrative of my family history, but also something that happened in the modern history of China, which is actually the Tiananmen Massacre happening in 1989. I am born in 86, so it's not really in my memory of this massacre happened. And, for my generation, and I believe for probably every generation after my generation now, that we wouldn't really have a chance to learn about the Tiananmen Massacre. And I only have knowledge about it because this incident that I accidentally watched a film, and that film was about the Tiananmen Massacre. It's a documentary about the Tiananmen Massacre. And some people, activists or dissidents, are actually inserting some message of the Tiananmen Massacre into a romantic film. So I just watched it by accident. And suddenly, in the middle of the film, it became this documentary about 1989's movement and about China's cracking down on those poor student by tanks. So that very incident makes me questioning the reality that how this very important historic tragedy is completely erased during the time that I grow up in China. And they are young, they are just university students, as I was watching the documentary. But their life got destroyed by this national machine. But their life is never respected, even mentioned. So that very incident makes me feel like I'm no longer can have a future in China if I want to express myself, whether as an artist or as someone studying law in China. And that's why I choose to leave China eventually and kind of reinvent myself in Australia now as an artist. But obviously my family history and this very knowledge about Tiananmen massacre does makes me to have a much clearer understanding of the Chinese government, and also makes me have this urge to use my art to expose more of those human rights abuse in China. Of course, for my family member who lost their lives during the persecution, but also for more people, for my generation, for my parents' generation, even for my children's generation, so that they can have a brighter future, a better future than now.
Yes, and it's very interesting. The importance of this story about the massacre of Tiananmen, because last year, the last vigils that were organized every year since 20 years in Hong Kong and in Macau, they were forbidden forever. And yes. In Macau, they were declared illegal since they occurred for the first time, since 20 years ago. So it's something very crazy, but this retroactive effect on the law, it's very crazy, but it's occurring. It's occurring, yes. And we must talk about this. So, but the irony, the sarcasm through which you express your art are absolutely brilliant, and I love it. In a recent interview, you mentioned that the more art you make, the more protect you feel. How does China see your work, and how do you deal with Beijing attempts to silence you? I was following what happened in United Kingdom with the exhibition that you organized there. I would like to hear you, because China, Beijing is trying to make a mess the lives of many people that are abroad, and is still resisting. So how are you dealing with this?
Well, I think I can say it very proudly that I'm one of the artists that hated the most by the Chinese government at this moment, because the very nature of my art is always about caring, humanity, and advocating for human rights. Actually, from the very beginning of my art practice, I know that I will be retaliated, harassed, and threatened by the Chinese government if they know my identity. So I started as an anonymous artist. That's how I started getting this nickname as China's Banksy. Well, even though I do not really like it for a couple of reasons, but it just shows that in order to speak up against this very powerful regime, that you have to protect yourself. And being able to hide your identity is one way to do that. But in 2018, when just before I'm going to having a major exhibition in Hong Kong, that my identity got breached by the Chinese National Security Police. So they took my relatives from Shanghai, China, to the police station. They threatened my family. They sending this threatening to my help us in Hong Kong for the exhibition, and finally that I have to cancel the show due to the concern of everybody's safety. And after that, I have to, make a decision because apparently the Chinese government has a very clear requirement. They want me to stop making art. They want me to disappear as Badiucao. But if I'm doing that, I'm basically betraying the identity as an artist. And this is the path that I choose. So now, instead of giving away my freedom of expression, I decide to reveal my face. I decide to make more art, having conversations, having interviews, so that, I can make my story, I can make China's story known by more people from the international community. And that is really the only way that I can have the support and sort of a protection, because the whole world now, for art like this, will understand China more and will support artists and people and activists like me than before. Recently, I had a show in Italy, and it was a very, very successful exhibition. I feel the show in Brescia really introduced a different perspective of China to the people who may not really have a clear understanding of this regime. However, not surprisingly, the Chinese embassy in Italy actually sending a threatening letter, not just to the museum who hosted the exhibition, but also to the mayor of Brescia. And what makes me pretty proud, and actually I have to use the word as surprise, that the museum and the city was holding this very strong solidarity with me. They didn't give up. They didn't compromise. Instead, they really uphold the rights, the freedom of speech that we from the free world really cherish as foundation of our society. The reason why I say it's a surprise is because I've been experiencing all sorts of self-censorship and compromising, even in the country that I'm staying now in Australia, that it's really rare for me to having opportunity to show work like what I had in Italy. And now the show is still ongoing until the 13th of February in Brescia. So that's something really extraordinary, and that makes me seeing, really the backbone of Europe, and that the courage of Europe to say no to this very powerful regime. But the reality is still harsh, that I'm still being very hard to find an opportunity to show work. I'm still receiving death threat in a daily basis from social medias. And in Australia, I'm actually being hacked, my internet being hacked, and physically I've been followed by agents and potentially associated with the Chinese government. So I have to say that now the Chinese government's aggression is not just inside China, but they have exporting this censorship and threatening globally. And as a dissident artist on the front line of battling this regime, this is what I can prove and tell the world, that this threat is very real.
Yes, what you are saying is what many critical people with critical positions is telling. Many activists are telling they are being threatened every day by the Chinese government, despite being outside the country, despite being in many parts of the world. They are really being threatened by the Chinese government, what is something very worrying for us. Well, last but not least, we are coming to the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing. And this is something that is very controversial also among the European countries. I would like to hear you about this issue. I know that you are very active, calling everybody to action against these Olympic Games, because it's really a way of washing the image of China. when they are committing grave violations of human rights, and that is intolerable. And we should act in accordance with our values, the values of freedom, the values of respect of human rights. I would like to hear you, because you have many works that are amazing, and that they are very creative, and the pictures are really impressive, and making with sarcasm, making us think a little bit about what we are doing, participating in these Olympic Games. I hope that everybody take this opportunity, of course, as we are going to have these Olympic Games, everybody take this opportunity to say no, to say clearly, we are not on the side of China. We don't stand with China. We stand with the activists and with those that defend human rights. Can you speak? I would like to hear you a little bit about these Olympic Games, and how are you seeing these Olympic Games?
Of course, because, well, this is going to be the second chance for China to have Olympic Games again. In 2008, they've already had the Summer Olympic. And actually in 2008, I was still in China. So I witnessing what happened in China. I see that by the time the Chinese government really want to use this game in 2008 to whitewash its human rights problems, but also it's trying to exporting this narrative that China is going to reform itself, is going to respecting human rights. I think that is why that the world was giving hope and opportunity for a country like China having the Olympic by the time. But now so many years has passed. Look at China now. The promise has been broken again and again. Now we're facing a genocide against the Uyghur community in the Xinjiang region. We're seeing the falling of once was a free city like Hong Kong and Macau, now losing the opportunity to really enjoy democracy or express themselves of the opinion which is different from the central government in Beijing. We're seeing China grow into this gigantic surveillance country that putting every resident into this greed to control it. And the last but not the least, that the whole world is still suffering of COVID-19 pandemic. And maybe it can be prevented from becoming a global pandemic if Chinese government is more transparent, do not censoring and punishing those doctors who try to warn the public in the very early stage, like Dr. Li Wenliang. So all of those has pointing to this new Olympic is such a hypocritical and problematic thing. And that is why I have a very strong stand to against it. And I feel it is a right decision for a lot of Western government to calling to do the boycott against it, especially doing a diplomatic boycott. I think what we can do is encouraging more countries to join in this, encouraging more politicians and the government to really act on this. And a diplomatic boycotting is a right thing to do. And of course, on the other hand, I think every politician and the government should protect and encourage their own athletes who will go to China to speak freely. If those athletes want to express the concern of political issues and human rights issues by saying this, which I mean not just narrow down in China, but also other human rights issues, all of their rights shall be protected, and they shall not have the fear to be threatened by an authoritarian government like China in Beijing during the Olympic Games. And lastly, I think it's very, very important that our civil society have the chance to understand why the government is doing the boycotting. We need to supporting those educational programs. We need to supporting art program to inform our voters, our people, to understand the real situation in China. And I do think, sport is such a great way to celebrating humanity, and it should never be used as a propaganda tool to whitewashing human rights crimes. And I'm pretty certain this is what the Chinese government is planning to do. From my experience in 2008, as well as I want to remind everyone that actually in last year's Tokyo Olympics, there are athletes from China wearing Mao Zedong's pin, who is probably one of the greatest dictator in the entire human history, which causing numerous of lives lost under his watch. But such a strong political object was allowed to wear by the Chinese athletes, and they're not punished, or they're not really regulated. So many examples has proved that the Chinese government is going to using this as another huge propaganda way to insert its narrative to a lot of people's mind, to exporting its way of governance, which has nothing to do with democracy or human rights, but about really tighten control of the society and about authoritarian way of governance. So this must be pointed out, and this must be stopped. As an artist, I feel that I'm just very responsible to this, and I have my influence. I have my voice. So that is why I actually created a lot of work about it. From a set of 5 fake posters, which is using political satire to against Olympic, to another set of animation that I collaborated with Human Rights Watch on the very issue of the Beijing's Olympic Games problems. And those works has been spreading both in the physical space as mural and street art, as well as for online space, like spreading on social media, as well as created as NFT project, which we'll be releasing very soon. So I do want to call for more artists to join me to pay attention to those very important issues and make our voice heard, make our voice about human rights being heard by more people in our society.
Thank you, Badiucau. Thank you for this talk. It was really amazing as you are and your work. Esta foi uma conversa vadia, desta vez com Badiucau, uma ativista de direitos humanos e um artista. Alguém que não tem silenciado a sua voz, apesar de todas as pressões feitas por Pequim no sentido de o silenciar. Alguém que está a resistir e que chama a nossa atenção no momento em que se vão disputar os Jogos Olímpicos de Inverno, para que haja um boicote. Foi aprovada uma resolução na União, no Parlamento Europeu, e há já países a declarar o seu boicote político a estes Jogos Olímpicos. Não haverá representação diplomática desses países nestes Jogos Olímpicos. Esperamos também que os atletas, naquela que é a grande festa do desporto, ergam a sua voz e encontrem formas criativas de expressar a sua preocupação pelos direitos humanos na China e em outros pontos do mundo. Mas não podemos esquecer nunca que as liberdades estão a ser cerceadas e os direitos humanos estão a ser violados na China, em Macau, em Hong Kong, no Tibete, em Xinjiang. Estas foram mais umas conversas vadias. Obrigada àqueles que nos seguiram. Fica aqui a mensagem do Badiucau, a quem agradeço imenso a sua disponibilidade e a forma como acedeu a participar nesta conversa.